I think what is essential about entrepreneurship is that we're working hard to reduce uncertainty. And so if that's what a startup is, that means you can find startups in garages, but you'll also find them in enterprise and in government and nonprofit, any place we're trying to create management conditions to handle extreme uncertainty. So let's talk for a second about why startups fail. Because I think one common belief is that the startups that succeed are the ones whose founders had good ideas, and the ones that fail are the ones whose founders had bad ideas. And I want to really disabuse anyone of that notion. In my research anyway, the startups that I've been involved in and the founders that I have interviewed, if you get to the real story of what happened, you will find that even the successful startups, the founders started with really abysmally bad ideas. I mean, usually so bad that they're embarrassed to talk about them in public, which is why you see these press stories about how they knew it all along and knew it was going to be a success, from day one. My personal current favorite is the PayPal story, where they started building digital cyber cash for PDAs, and then all of a sudden they became the online payment provider for eBay. And it's like, what does digital cyber cash have to do with online auction payments? Not really a lot if you look at it from a linear point of view. If you actually read the real story of what happened, they went through a series of what I call pivots, changes in direction, major iterations that allowed them to kind of learn what wasn't working about their vision and then adjust a little bit at a time. And eventually, through this kind of zigzaggy series of steps, they were able to find success. And that pivoting action is really common to almost all successful startup stories. And the premise of the lean startup is actually very simple. If we can do those pivots, those major iterations faster, then we'll increase our odds of being successful with our product. So let me illustrate with stories of two startups that I've had the privilege of being. And I mentioned, well, the very first startup I did after I learned how to deceive people about my age in the Java world. I then did a startup that was a complete flame out. It was during the dot-com bubble, and I had the fate of many dot-com companies. And I thought that what I needed to do was learn how the professional entrepreneurs did it. So I moved to the world headquarters of entrepreneurship, Silicon Valley in the United States. And I thought I would join a company that really seemed like it was destined for success. I call that startup number one. That's all I'm going to say about it for the moment. You'll see why in a moment. This is what startup number one looked like. I want you to picture me. I was relatively young. That seems to be the recurring theme of today. And I get a phone interview with a startup that had gotten my resume, and they wouldn't tell me what they were building. They were building in stealth. It was a secret. They just said, well, put me through a very difficult technical interview, and they said, show up. We'll fly you out to California. Show up at this address, and this is what it looked like. It was this nondescript gray warehouse. This is truly in the middle of nowhere in Silicon Valley. And when you walk in the door, here's what you would see. I don't know, can you read this sign? It says, I'll read it to you. We are building something that your friends will lust after and beg to beta test. It's not B2B e-commerce. We can't tell you what it is. But we can tell you who's on the team, and in startups, it's all about the team. And let me tell you, when I saw this sign, I was ready to join. I didn't know what they were building. I had no idea if the product made any sense. I had no idea if we were in a market where we'd make any money. This could have been the CIA for all I knew. But I knew that if we just got the smartest people in the world together and had them work on something really extraordinary, good things would happen. I call it the IQ theory of entrepreneurship. And here's the plan that really smart set of people put together. And what I want to emphasize is that the reason I was excited to join this company was because of this plan. Right? Our idea was we'd create a really compelling long-term vision. We'd raise lots of money from high-quality investors. We'd hire the best and the brightest, a really experienced management team. And then we would really focus on building quality software. This is a software consumer internet business. And we would ship it when it was ready and no sooner. Why? Because we wanted to reach mainstream customers. We didn't want to get stuck with niche early adopters. We wanted everybody to be able to use our product because our aspiration was to change the world. And in order to do that, we had to reach those mainstream customers when we finally had our exciting product launch. And in order to do that, we had to have what they call buzz. Right? We had to have people in the press and in the blogosphere speculating about what we were working on and wondering, what's this stealth thing going? So that when we finally came out of stealth, it would be a major news event and we would achieve major results with mainstream customers. And I know none of you have a plan like that, but maybe you have a friend who's thinking about doing something like this. Anybody? Just checking. Okay. So what we did was what I call achieving failure. We set about $40 million on fire, and this cost us about 5 years of our lives. So it was actually a relatively painful experience. But I call it achieving failure because it's important to understand that we did not fail to execute the plan that I just mentioned. Actually, we executed it flawlessly. We did build a high-quality software. We hired the best and the brightest, and we really had the launch you would dream of. The issue was that we were crippled by 3 shadow beliefs. And I call them shadow beliefs because They were beliefs that motivated our behavior and yet were never spoken out loud, ever. I'll tell you about three. The first is that we know what customers want, which, I mean, I think it seems obvious. If you want people to work 120% on a great new idea, you have to believe you know what customers want. And there's nothing wrong with having that level of belief. Of course, what you're really saying is that you believe that customers will want the product when it's finally built. And there's a bit of an issue, because that's not strictly speaking true. That's a little bit speculative. But great startup founders have the ability to convince everybody in their vicinity that this thing, which is only sort of true, actually is true. And the only problem with that, it's not that that's bad. Good startup founders have that. Bad startup founders have it. But also crazy people have that ability to convince people in their vicinity, to join a cult because things which are not literally true are believed to be true. And so that's one issue. Second, this is really one for the crazy people. This is that we can accurately predict the future, which if you say this out loud, you're in trouble in most polite society. But in startups, we tend to believe in the plans that we put in our business plan that we use to raise money. And our business plan had a spreadsheet in the back that claimed that something like in the first year we would have 1 million simultaneous users of this product. And so every department had to be staffed up in anticipation of the rush of customers that were going to show up. And so you can imagine if I'm the head of customer service, my job is to make sure that when those 1 million mainstream customers show up, they have good customer service, which means I have to have a big staff. You multiply that times every department, you'll understand why this company had 200 employees before customers ever saw the product. But lest you think I'm only picking on the non-technical functions, you can imagine what our software architecture looked like, right? Because we, of course, had to be ready with a heavyweight architecture designed to scale to 1 million simultaneous users. And this was a heavyweight 3D virtual world kind of product. So this is very heavyweight architecture. And of course, that required us to have a pretty accurate model of what customer behavior would be so we could partition the load effectively. And you can, of course, imagine what happened when that model turned out to be just slightly inaccurate. Not only did our beautiful heavyweight architecture not scale worth crap, but we also had lost all the agility necessary to change directions in anticipation of the customers that did show. Third shadow belief is that advancing the plan is progress. And having seen the Agile Ways track a little bit today, this has gotten a fair bit of attention, right? What is the difference between expending energy and making progress? Now, we'll talk about it in a moment. When we're building a product where we know what it's supposed to be, we can at least, using Agile techniques, tell whether we're approaching that final goal. But my question is, for the entrepreneurs, especially in the room, if you don't even know what product you're trying to build, how do you know if you're making progress? And my experience is that most startup founders are especially gifted at keeping people busy. That's basically their superpower. In order to keep everybody on the team really motivated, they keep people busy. But when they go to sleep at night, if you ask them this question and get them to answer honestly and say, okay, you spent money today, you spent time and energy, but did you make any progress? Most of the time, our answer has to be, we don't know. And so those shadow beliefs, I think, are a little bit embarrassing to talk about, which is why, like I said, most entrepreneurs don't. But some people say, especially if you're not an entrepreneur, it can kind of be like, well, that's kind of obvious. Look, nobody acts like that in the real world. And that's why I just wanted to put this good plan up on the board again and just ask ourselves whether our actions as an industry live up to our ideals. That is, if you really negated each of those shadow beliefs, would we really be making plans like this? And like I said, I know none of you have a plan like this, but maybe you have a friend. Let me tell you a little bit about startup number 2, because we had that really embarrassing failure in startup number 1, and I think it was the magnitude of our humiliation gave us the courage to try something different.